Imagine this. You're working your regular shift at a local Chinese food takeaway, just doing what you must to make a living. Minimum wage, minimum effort. You lay down in the basement of that same Chinese takeaway that you rent for cheap. Suddenly, when scrolling social media, you see an advert. It's a wealthy individual looking for a personal butler. Why not apply? What's the worst that could happen? You schedule a meeting with this interesting fellow from your home country of China, and suddenly, your life changes in an amazing way. From living in the basement, being paid a few dollars an hour to make Chinese food, to buying 6-bedroom mansions, flying first class across the globe, buying expensive jewelry, and living life to the fullest. Everything is amazing. Life is a fairy tale. Until the British police raid your home, confiscate your Bitcoin while your boss hops the fence, leaving you to face the music alone. Now you can't locate her, you're broke, and you are going to prison. Suddenly, the basement of the Chinese takeaway doesn't seem so bad. This is the true story of Zimin Xian, the Bitcoin supervillain, her decade-long multiple billion-dollar heist, and the ongoing evasion of multiple governments. In 2014, a new technology company popped up in Beijing by the name of Tianjin Lantian Jiru Electronic Technology. This business promised customers a swift return of 300% on any money invested. How, you ask? Well, obviously this is fiction, but they claimed, as many Ponzi schemes do, to have a huge Bitcoin mining farm. Unlike her competitors in the world of fraud, Xian went much further in building the lie. You see, most Ponzi scheme operations are lazy, and they will claim to have a product, but know that if their lies are good enough, no one's ever going to check. After all, they're offering unrealistic returns on purpose, to weed out the type of person who would ask hard questions or demand proof. They typically aim specifically for the most greedy and gullible only. Xian decided to do things a little different. She bought office space as well as old, mostly defunct, inexpensive and useless mining equipment for the fake Bitcoin farm, though she set it up to look as legit as possible and invited prospective investors to view the operation before making any big decisions. Then, with the money raised, she rented out the most prestigious locations for promotional events and continued with the age-old confidence play of fake it till you make it. The operation grew very quickly, and soon LGET had a considerable number of staff on the books. Zimin Xian never herself was on these books. Instead, she used associates to fill in for her as proxies, paying them handsomely to pretend they oversaw the business, told fantastical lies about what would happen if anything went wrong, how she could come down and save them from any legal consequences. Don't worry, just take this $111,000 as a bonus, and trust me, she would tell them. So they did. But by July of 2017, LGET and their amazingly profitable business of mining Bitcoin had come under the scrutiny of the Chinese government. Obviously, the only solution for Qian was to escape, and luckily, she'd been preparing for this very moment since the very beginning. After all, the second you start a Ponzi scheme, there is an invisible fuse that is ignited. Eventually, siphoning off funds while paying out early investors to maintain the illusion of legitimacy will result in only one outcome. People will get paid out less and less until the wheels fall off and the journey comes to an inevitable end. This is the guaranteed conclusion of the fraudulent business model. Whether it takes a week, a month, 1 year or 10, it will eventually end. But for Qian, she hadn't just paid employees to shroud her identity and involvement, she'd also paid them to open verified identity cryptocurrency exchange accounts for her, using their own details. Within those accounts was where she was then depositing the user funds. So when the Chinese government came sniffing around, Qian simply grabbed her black Lenovo laptop, filled a bag with clothing, and hopped on the first flight out of Beijing. By the time people checked the Huobi account that had been used to accumulate stolen funds, it was empty. Instead, they saw massive transfers flowing to a wallet that was now safely stored on that black Lenovo laptop. It was sitting inconspicuously in the overhead compartment on a flight to Laos. Little did anybody know, this was one of the most expensive laptops on the planet. Given that even in 2017 when this happened, That single Bitcoin wallet stored within would have been valued around $175 million. After arriving in Southeast Asia and getting her ducks in a row for a few months, Qian and her newly obtained forged identity documents flew from Laos to the United Kingdom, landing in September of 2017 with the newly assumed name of Zhang. Now, due to the easily tracked nature of Bitcoin, Qian didn't have much of an opportunity to convert any of the Bitcoin into cash within those few months, which was lucky for her because by the time her feet touched the ground in London, that Bitcoin had already roughly doubled in value, and that was just the beginning of the madness. Qian's original scam had promised to triple her client's investment, and ironically, had they just bought Bitcoin instead of trusting her, they would have shared in Qian's excitement when December rolled around, and that Bitcoin was now worth $15,000 each, up from the $2,000 when she first left China just months ago. Given that the money kept growing, and Qian, now living as Zhang, felt comfortably safe in the UK, she needed to find a way to convert those ill-gotten gains into real, tangible worth. So, just like before, she set out to build a network of helpers, as she'd done with the first fraud back home. Instead of putting out adverts and hiring traditionally, Zhang posted to Chinese social media app WeChat, looking to attract a local but fellow Chinese expat. This advert wasn't looking for a money launderer or some other villainous role, just a simple butler. Interviews were organised and conducted at a local 5-star hotel in Kensington where Zhang was staying. This is when Jian Wen arrived, looking to better her life, going from a minimum wage fast food worker to hopefully something better. The pair hit it off, and this is where the story between them becomes impossible to determine from truth or courtroom fabrication. Wen would go on to claim that from this point onwards she knew nothing of Zhang's life, of the crime in China, of the stolen funds, or of the criminality in any of their dealings. Instead, that Zhang was her employer's real name, that she was a privately wealthy individual and due to poor health needed a live-in assistant who just so happened to now live in a £17,000 per month rent 6-bedroom mansion and needed her help to buy expensive properties and luxury goods all over the world. All the while paying her just £500 a month. However, whether she knew or not doesn't change how the story continues. Within months of meeting, Wen's life had changed forever, like something out of a Disney movie. In this story, however, there was no crystal slipper or magical beans, but there was a wicked witch who needed Wen's assistance to jet set around Europe, trying to find ways to buy assets with stolen magical internet money known as Bitcoin. The pair always arrived together in different countries, but Zhang was always using different names, and strangely, they just happened to avoid any country that had an extradition agreement with China. Never did the pair appear in pictures together, not when they flew to Zurich to buy diamonds and watches, not when they were in London buying hundreds of thousands of dollars of clothes, or in Dubai to buy property. So you might think, with this level of money and criminal mastermind, that they were quiet about their operation. But you'd be wrong. They weren't quiet or particularly intelligent about how they tried to launder the goods. They weren't using cash-heavy businesses like laundromats you'd see in a movie, just two individuals buying everything with increasingly valuable Bitcoin transactions and leaving a growing paper trail that led right to their doorstep. Though, in a recurring fashion, Zhang was leaving much of the transactions in the name of her new butler Wen, who likely had no idea that her previous pawn, along with dozens of other former employees, were now sitting in a Chinese prison, paying for their association with her boss, who they knowingly or unknowingly helped steal a reported 40 billion yuan, which is around $5.6 billion. But now you've heard the come up, how they got the money, what they were doing with it. But what went wrong? How did they get caught? Well, just like other criminals who make it up as they go, they were simply too sloppy and inexperienced to handle such a large sum of stolen money. This is something that requires a lifetime of experience and finesse. Almost every financial system on the planet has anti-money laundering policies in place, and despite the United Kingdom being one of the hubs of dirty money invested in real estate, it's much more complex than meets the untrained eye. Within a year of the pair working together, Wen, at the behest of her boss, had tried to purchase incredibly expensive real estate with the stolen funds, ignorant of the fact that a pure cash purchase of such a large and expensive, reportedly £26 million property would be heavily scrutinised by lawyers. After all, you don't just show up at someone's doorstep and hand them a suitcase of money, or in this case a USB of Bitcoin, and suddenly own the property. Anyone selling something of that value would need the transaction to be done through legitimately practicing law firms with signed documents, proof of fund sources, and guarantees. When failed these simple checks, the lawyers turned over the information to the police, which led to the first raid on their £17,000 per month rental mansion in 2018. During this raid, Wen reportedly deleted texts while the police arrived outside, and her boss, despite being described in court by Wen as being bedbound for 20 hours of the day with poor health, used an unexpected burst of agility to escape the premises and leave her employee to face the music alone. Funnily enough, this raid didn't result in the end of their criminal life. For whatever reason, the police seized electronic devices, but didn't arrest either of the women or even know the extent of what was being seized. The police had no idea that the laptop now sat in the evidence lockup contained 61,000 Bitcoin, worth, at that time, roughly $390 million. Investigations continued with another raid in 2020, but somehow, just like in 2018 and the year before in China, Qian managed to escape once more, just in the nick of time. On this occasion, it was 2 days before she was scheduled to attend an in-person interview regarding the case. Instead, she boarded a plane and vanished, leaving Wen alone, again, with nothing but her Gucci bag and brand new Mercedes. The 3,000 Bitcoin that her boss gifted her for whatever reason had been seized by now, leaving her slightly wealthier than her time in the Chinese fast food joint in Leeds, but now facing years in prison for an ever-elusive Bitcoin criminal employer. The Metropolitan Police continue to investigate who her boss could be, and as they followed the paper trail, discovered the link to the Chinese investor fraud. It wasn't until mid-2021 that the police discovered how the digital devices confiscated in 2018's raid was considerably more valuable than they thought. It was at this time that the still-on-the-run Xian's lawyer submitted an appeal on her behalf, claiming that her client had a right to the peaceful use of her Bitcoin under the Human Rights Act. An appeal that, if successful, would have handed over access to a device that now contained around $2.5 billion of Bitcoin. This appeal didn't end in their favour, but at the end of it all, Wen went to court, where she took the stand and told a story about how she was the unwilling patsy for a manipulative mastermind, how she knew nothing of the ongoings, and that she was just doing what her bedridden, sickly, wealthy employer instructed. The prosecution presented evidence that showed Wen searching for very specific terms such as what is the definition of money laundering, how to buy a house in Bitcoin without showing where it came from, and which countries have an extradition agreement with China, whilst travelling through Europe by ground, as well as text logs recovered from her device that proved she lied about having contact with her boss after the disappearance. For this, Wen was found guilty on multiple charges relating to money laundering and will be sentenced on May 10th, 2024. As for her boss, well, much like other Ponzi scheme operators who somehow managed to escape the law, such as the elusive Ruja Ignatova from the world-famous OneCoin scam, Zimin Qian Zhang, or whatever other name she's now using, is still missing, now on the run from two governments, and likely soon to be on some of the world's most wanted lists. For people like these scammers, the world is shrinking, and so too is their war chest of stolen goods, with increasingly common seizures of linked properties, accounts, and arrested accomplices. After all, if it's on the chain, it's easily trackable. In this case, it's publicly not known how much she has left, or if the people helping to secret her away will do her harm before the governments catch up on the trail. But that's the life of a criminal. They built it for themselves. In this specific case, it's a life much different than Xian wrote about in her diary that was read aloud in court during the trial of her employee Wen. That diary called out the people who had laughed at her for being poor, proclaiming she would grow millions, which did come true. She also said that the Dalai Lama would announce her as a reincarnated goddess, as well as buying a $5 million royal scepter and crown, while taking up her place as the Queen of Liberland. Liberland, if you don't know, is an unrecognized microstate bordering Croatia and Serbia, where the occupants believe themselves outside the jurisdiction of the world, which brings in many Bitcoin or cryptocurrency dreamers to their shores. That part of the dream is unlikely to come true, but who knows? Maybe Liberland will receive a new resident with another new passport and enough Bitcoin to really become their ruler. For now, the 61,000 Bitcoin seizure, which is worth a little over $4 billion as I write this video, sits in the hands of the UK government, making them suddenly one of the largest holders of the digital currency and one of the few governments with billions of dollars accumulated through criminal seizures. But it is impossible to tell how much more Xi'an had access to and whether she'll remain free for long enough to try and launder it into another luxurious living once again. Though we can tell from her history that if she does, it will likely be through another pawn who will find themselves without a chair to sit on once the music stops playing. Just like Jian Wen, the Chinese takeaway worker, as well as her other employees in China. With that being said, this marks one of the largest seizures of Bitcoin ever, as well as an interesting story how somebody who seems to have very poor operational security or understanding of money can somehow steal billions of dollars and evade multiple governments. Though who knows for how long. Thanks for watching.